All right, here we're graphing sine x with multipliers outside the function and multipliers inside the function. So just like before, just like with any family, if you multiply something outside the function, it's always going to have a direct vertical effect. Times 5 is going to stretch it up 5. Times a half is going to shrink it down by a half. In terms of sine and cosine wave, that's really talking about the amplitude of the wave. It's going to change how high and low it can achieve. If it's negative, just like before, it's going to flip it. It's going to take that y, positive negativity, flip it on its head, right? It's making everything else positive and negative. So it's going to feel like it's flipping over the x-axis, but it's still affecting the y number line. The b being inside the function is going to mess with horizontal, the x-axis. It's going to be an inverse, just like before. Multiplier is going to feel like it shrinks, and dividers are going to feel like it stretches it out. It's kind of inverse feel to it. In terms of a sine cosine wave, that's going to affect the period, right? So how long does it take to achieve a full revolution? It's shrinking and stretching. And everything's going to be referencing radians in this case. Anytime we're graphing sine or cosine, we're going to use 2 pi as its period. And that's referencing how many radians it would take to complete a full cycle or go around the circle a full time. And so that b term simply affects 2 pi in an inverse way, and that's going to generate your new period of your new graph. So over here I have an example. All this hinges and depends on knowing what the unaltered version of the sine wave looks like. That's this blue dashed line. Starts at 0, goes up to 1, goes down to -1, and it takes 2 pi to go through that full cycle, radians. If I have a 3 in front of it, being outside the function is going to affect y, going to affect amplitude. So just identifying that that is my a term and recognizing that it's going to affect my amplitude. So instead of getting up to 1 and down to -1, it now can go up to 3 and down to -3. Now I like to give myself bounds, right? I don't know where those peaks are actually going to happen yet, but I'm giving myself kind of a window to stay between 3 and -3. My range has been stretched by a multiple of 3, both directions. That 2 there is my b term. But I got to use that b term in reference to the original period, which was 2 pi. Being multiplied by 2, I need to divide my original period by 2. And that'll tell me my new period is simply 1 pi. So I have to get up to 3, down to -3, back to 0, all now within a small period of pi, because that has also been affected. So now I'm going to put it all together here. Same starting point, 0 gets stretched to 0, right? I'm going up to 3, and I got to get all the way back to its starting point by the time I get to pi. I'm going to mark my middle ground. That's where I'm going to hit 0 again. All the way up to 3, through that 0 down to -3, back to pi, full revolution. And that's going to happen every time. Every time I get through a pi, I'm going to go through that revolution. So I have this kind of blue original unaltered sign has gotten crushed, has gotten reduced, right? It's happening twice as fast. That's one way to make sense of it. It's happening twice as many times in that time frame, and it's 3 times as big. One more example here for cosine. I got an a outside, I got a b inside. So that 4 being outside is my a term and going to be my new amplitude. Cosine originally starts at 1 right off the bat and goes down to -1 and back up in that 2 pi cycle. So now I can achieve a high of 4 and a low of -4 because of that big multiplier out front there. The b term in this case is going to be 1/2. Right, it's being multiplied by a half, it's being divided by 2. So I need to take my original period for cosine. Thankfully, it's also 2 pi, same as sine. And I need to divide by that multiple, divide by that b term. So I'm actually dividing by a half, which is like multiplying by the reciprocal. It's really turning it into 4 pi. Divided by a half is really multiplying by 2. So now I have a high of 4, low of -4. Starts in a relatively same position as the original cosine wave. So the original cosine wave starts at its amplitude. So I need to start this guy at his new amplitude. And I got to get all the way down to -4 and all the way back up. But now I have 4 pi, a time frame of 4 pi to achieve that full cycle. So it's going to feel slower, it's going to feel stretched out. So I got to go here. My halfway mark is going to be my trough. 4 pi, I got to get back up to where I started. Just give myself little benchmarks here. And halfway between the high and the low is where I'm going to cross 0. Halfway between the low and high is where I'm going to cross 0. So I'm giving myself little connected dots here to follow. So I'm going to go down, start bending back the other way. So hit that 0, start bending back the other way. I can go back and make that a little bit prettier. But my period is now twice as long because it got divided by 2, and 4 times as high amplitude because I got to multiply by 4.